There's a side of social media that tends to creep into our home feeds, always keeping itself out of the limelight unless it's over discourse. It's chaotic, anonymous, and built around people sharing the most self-destructive thoughts and actions in real time. Shed Twitter, short for self-harm eating disorder, is a Twitter culture revolving around those very things. If you've heard of it, it was probably described as a dangerous toxic cesspool, or maybe defended as a misunderstood safety net. But neither side truly understand why it exists, persists, and attempts to call it out almost always backfire. Today, I'm gonna tell you the full story, where it came from and how it grew, why it's so hated, but why criticism against it always fails, and lastly, what happens when pain, mental illness, minors, and an engagement-based algorithm create a massive online community. Also, a segment afterwards giving potential solutions and alternatives. My name is vPlasma, and for the love of God, if you're in Shed Twitter, please get the fuck out of it. So, where did it come from and why do people join? Shed started sometime in 2021 after SH and ED Twitter merged together, since they had a lot in common and members were usually in both anyways. It just made sense. Those communities started the same reason Shed did. Individuals suffering from these conditions were looking for a place to vent and not feel so alone. A place to share their struggles without judgment and work towards recovery. So, they started one. This part alone is perfectly fine, and if that's what Shed Twitter was truly about, then the tone of this video would be very different. Unfortunately, what they find instead is a disguised feedback loop, hidden behind the promising wall of a community that gets you and creates supportive environments. As for joining it, users typically stumble across Shed and hover around it for a while before actually becoming part of it, since the tamer post can be pretty relatable for the average age demographic. What is that, by the way? Roughly 14 years old. It's pretty rare to see anyone over the age of 17 in Shed, which is going to make this story a lot more disheartening than it needs to be. Shed users over the age of 18 are usually the ones defending the group vehemently and the ones who run the bigger Shed communities. Keep that in mind. The actual intent of Shed varies since it's not a uniform community. It's a decentralized network of subcultures under an umbrella term, but I assure you it's hardly focused on fixing anything. This is not to say there aren't positive posts at all. You'll meet a few genuinely good people in these spaces. That being said, negative posts and videos are oftentimes rewarded with engagement from the masses, while recovery and venting tend to be otherwise ignored. Despite this, anything Shed related will always label themselves a support group, while ironically taking pride in how toxic they are. A way to loosely admit what they're really about within these groups without saying it outright. A dog whistle, if you will. Calling themselves a support group is essentially plausible deniability, a way to dodge criticism and accountability when you bring up the shopping list of controversies surrounding them. They're sort of infamous for getting very defensive when called out, and have a whole plethora of arguments and excuses at the ready. No matter what you say, they will have a counter, most of which I'll be going over in a moment. In Shed, turning your suffering into a spectacle is a big part of the culture. Posts about your experiences in a nonchalant or joking sense tend to blow up, and posting photos or videos tend to garner a lot of attention. Naturally, the more extreme, the more views you pull. Do not be mistaken, this attention is not concern. It's from people who enjoy this type of content, evident from the replies they leave. This formula handed to a massive group of mentally ill, insecure teenagers looking for validation is dangerous at best. Getting addicted to this attention is very easy, and if they do, it'll be a long, painful road of destroying themselves for internet clout. If that sounds dumb, please remember every internet challenge ever. Motherfuckers were eating Tide Pods in 2016. While they go down this road, people who probably belong in a certain registry or in a certain government institution will come up with excuses for why this system is okay. Mental illness is hardly a concern inside Shed Twitter. It's an aesthetic, something to be admired rather than resolved, and you don't need to dig very deep to figure this out. Most accounts here use aesthetic copypasta introductions, and theme their profiles after anime or cartoon characters with names like X of Shed Twitter. The most damning evidence of the aesthetic allegations are their own photos, overlaying them with filters and spamming cutesy flower clip art over their bleeding arms, heavily reminiscent of the cute core/cute gore aesthetic, which was purely for the visuals and in no way a support thing. All the people have to say are positive things about the aesthetic and incentive to keep posting these, not, literally anything helpful to try and get them to stop. Disclaimer tags don't stop minors from finding these posts, barring the fact it's minors posting them in the first place, since if they did want to mute the posts, they would have to go out of their way to mute every trigger warning phrase. Doesn't seem very secure to me, in addition to the fact that most of these posts aren't even censored. In fact, disclaimers make it even easier to find these posts, since they can just search those up. The danger in Shed isn't that people talk about being unwell. That's the first step of recovery in 99% of situations. No, the problem starts with how the space reframes harm as part of someone's identity, something they need to continue living with, take pride in, and never seek out a solution. This is then accelerated by rewarding those who showcase the extent of their illness with mass attention. The platform itself amplifies the problem. Twitter's algorithm is pure evil, especially the recently updated version. It targets users with extreme content to keep you addicted, even when the things it pushes violate its own terms of service. If you've seen an uptick in crazy shit on your timeline lately, that's why. Simply put, the worse someone gets, the more attention they receive. The more attention they get, the less likely they are to break their habits. It's validation and addicting as hell. As vile as this is to say, this dynamic creates a sort of competition inside Shed, and severity of posts escalate to ensure you stay at the top. I'm not trying to make a joke when I say there are literal elitists in Shed Twitter who will criticize you for not being real enough and even gatekeep what razors they use. Burner accounts make accountability nearly impossible. If someone manages to be so toxic they get outcasted by Shed Twitter, they'll be back in a week. It's especially bad with eating disorders. That side of the community and ED Twitter itself are known for being horrendously toxic towards one another. What is supposed to be mutual support turns into reinforcement. Meanwhile, outside help is discouraged by denouncing sources like therapy is useless, and getting better is silently labeled as betrayal. Leaving Shed Twitter is quite literally frowned upon by the larger community, something members themselves will say. They'll do this while rewarding someone for destroying themselves rather than sticking to what's supposedly their number one principle. This gives the impression that a lot of Shed Twitter members want to get worse, watch others get worse, or at the very least take pride in their bad habits. They've been conditioned to believe it as who they're supposed to be, even if they clearly hate it. You can find posts like this one that are full of replies saying how they use Shed to trigger relapses, give themselves episodes, overall get worse, and acknowledging they know this but saying it's actually a good thing for them and that they want it. Before moving on to the next chapter, I want to cover SPO, a common suffix for inspiration in Shed. For example, thinspo. Short for thin inspiration, it mostly refers to media of extremely thin individuals, far beyond what most would consider healthy. It's another negative echo chamber disguised as something positive, but only serves to distort someone's self-perception. Thinspo glorifies being underweight, teaches users that starvation leads to beauty, and is disguised as motivational content when the reality is far darker. It's simply there to push an unhealthy comparison and dangerous body standard to people suffering from eating disorders. Thinspo is not the only inspiration either. There's fatspo, scarspo, and cutspo, which do the exact same thing. It's not uncommon to see people celebrate eating only a couple ketchup packets across multiple days, or setting absolutely ridiculous daily calorie limits despite already being underweight. It's common to see users include their BMI in their bios. Despite how low they are, their posts still center around an obsession with dropping weight. Consolation from the rest of the community is not trying to break somebody out of this way of thinking, but rather telling them, don't worry, you'll get there eventually. So not a great introduction. If you point any of this out, Shed users will get up in arms about it. When I mention the community is defensive, I wasn't joking. I'll go into further detail about the community soon, but first, I'd like to go over the most frequent arguments for why Shed is actually a good thing, and why they believe criticism against them is invalid. This will be useful for providing a clearer profile on the Shed community at large later down the line. Number 1. It's just event space. Alternatively, this is a community for the mentally ill. This is the most frequent offense, essentially claiming it's insensitive to suggest Shed might be unhealthy. Members argue it's simply a place to release thoughts they can't say elsewhere, and that venting is healthier than bottling things up. That would be great. Dare I say Shed would be amazing if everyone truly thought of it that way and actually wanted to get better. Sadly, venting becomes harmful when it's paired with mass attention from self-destructive behavior and aestheticized harm, which is a huge part of Shed's community. Expression and having these problems are not the issue. The echo chamber and rewarded attention for getting worse is. Number 2. We don't encourage anyone. This is kind of like what YouTubers and news outlets do to avoid getting sued for defamation, including alleged in front of everything someone's accused for even if it's obviously true. Shed users argue that they're just expressing themselves and never encourage others to follow suit, which isn't actually true since it does happen, but for the sake of the argument, I'll play ball. Yes, this is technically true. Most users don't outright tell people to do something, but I'd argue that posts which gain hundreds, sometimes thousands of likes, melancholically embracing their own downfall and sharing shock content is not exactly discouraging them either. On top of that, it's extremely common to see compliments under videos of people cutting. That's not incentive to get better, that's incentive to keep going. Also, research into this very thing has proven emotional descriptions of things like self-harm and starvation, even without explicit instructions, can function as encouragement. Here's a good example of what I mean. Man, I really need to piss right now. Here, maybe this'll help. You're not telling bro to piss his pants, but you're not exactly a remedy to the situation either. That's basically what the entirety of Shed Twitter is. Number 3. If you don't like it, don't look. This frames Shed Twitter as a personal choice and shifts responsibility onto viewers. There seems to be this weird belief that you can just permanently block Shed Twitter from your timeline forever, and you actively need to seek it out. If only this was the case. Twitter's algorithm functions off shock and interaction. Regardless of intent with these posts, they don't stay contained solely to those who opt into Shed Twitter. Liking posts spreads them around. These posts get a lot of likes. Seems pretty simple to me. The only solution would be for every single person outside of Shed Twitter to mute the fucking library of words they use to never see their posts, and that's obviously not gonna happen. Number 4 is one that I've been hit with numerous times. Censoring us makes things worse. Many argue that criticizing or attacking their culture is equal to censorship, and if successful will push users into further isolation, make their problems worse, and maybe even push them to darker platforms. A hypothetical scenario where Shed just disappeared and made all the users worse is not a valid defense, especially when Shed's amplification culture causes the same thing in the end anyways. Criticism is not an attempt to silence them, it's to try and reduce the reinforcement and escalation frequently caused by members of Shed. Number 5 is interesting. Shed Twitter members will criticize other recovery-oriented communities for being judgmental and dishonest, a way to get out of finding other places to go. Some of these spaces are definitely flawed. I mean, this video is about one of them. But just because those places are bad doesn't mean Shed Twitter is any better, especially when being better in this case is not holding anyone accountable for anything. It's like if your therapist was unlicensed and did literally nothing but agree with you, tell everyone else was in the wrong, and try to change nothing. Maybe I'm in the wrong here, but I don't exactly think reminding someone to wash their wounds and spamming emojis in their replies is pushing someone towards kicking their habit, which is the extent of support Shed will offer someone. Number 6. We warn people with trigger warnings. Disclaimers like trigger warning, SH, are used as proof of responsibility. Let's just be honest, trigger warnings don't do shit, especially when most of these posts don't even censor the images attached. I already explained how this doesn't work earlier. Number 7 is a much more personal one for the user. They'll say that it's the only place people truly understand them. It's often sincere, unlike the other reasons on here. A lot of members feel alienated from other communities, and this extends to family, therapists, and friends in the real world. I've seen people focus way more on this point than the others, and it makes me kind of upset since it's more like an excuse to attack someone, rather than trying to get them out. That being said, feeling understood doesn't mean the environment is safe. Validation without accountability can deepen illness rather than relieve it, even without realizing. This will sound like a fucking crazy comparison, but that's the main recruiting tactic of cults. Some of the worst ones in history. They make emotionally distraught and needy people feel cared for and understood, slowly revealing what they're truly about later on. But by that point, you've already become complicit and it's too late. And if you try leaving, other members will try to keep you there. Sounds vaguely familiar, doesn't it? The 8th excuse is fundamentally the same. Outsiders don't get it. This establishes an us versus them divide, discouraging outside perspectives and building resistance to help. Another cult tactic, by the way. Number 9 is frustrating. Critics just hate mentally ill people, or shortened down to getting called ableist. Some members like to frame criticism as stigma or cruelty towards mentally ill individuals. Now yes, some people are fucking assholes and use Shed Twitter as a punching bag, but on the more rational side, critiquing a harmful community is not the same as attacking the people in it. In fact, most criticism exists because the people do care, it's just not seen that way. Poor examples are cherry-picked to reinforce the idea that it's once again us versus them. Lastly, the 10th excuse. We were already like this. Shed Twitter didn't cause it. They argue the community doesn't create or accelerate illness, it's just centered around it. While the first part is true, they were likely already struggling before joining Shed Twitter, that does not mean the environment cannot worsen or prolong that lifestyle. Simply going on Twitter and looking it up for yourself makes this more than apparent. Although I wouldn't suggest you do this, you'll see some pretty gross stuff. These last two serve as a segue into the next chapter. Number 11 is the ultimate rebuttal against all criticism. We don't mean harm, so harm can't be happening. In mental health-oriented spaces, impact matters more than intent. The good intentions alone seem to absolve any wrongdoing from their minds. If you point out that harm is very well happening, you get the final excuse. Number 12. Those people are outliers, a tiny fraction of an otherwise perfectly stable community. On that note, it's a perfect time to showcase the joining and desensitization process, how a new member of Shed transforms into someone who turns their rapid mental decline into a public spectacle, and later we'll show the exact kind of audience they're posting to. The process for joining Shed typically goes something like this. An insecure, lonely teen stumbles across the hashtag with a semi-relatable post attached. Now that they're aware of it, they'll occasionally browse it out of morbid curiosity. It's shocking, yet captivating. As they scroll, they'll find more things that resonate a little too much. Other people sharing the same insecurities, even memes about them. What a welcome change of pace. Amidst these posts are Shed-specific terms that really establish a sense of community, and these terms start taking root in their head. Whether this person meant to or not, they've just entered the Shed Twitter pipeline, and before they know it, they're making posts under the hashtag and including it in their bio. Within the community itself, everything is initially concerning and stands out, but over time the shock disappears. It's all so common. Things that used to be alarming start to feel normal, even familiar, and the thought may cross their mind. Does that apply to me? People here often wonder if their struggles are even valid since others have it worse, going out of their way to make their habits worse just to keep up with the rest of Shed. Getting out of the community at this point is very hard, since it feels like the only community in the entire world who understands and pays attention to you. Even acknowledging the negatives isn't enough. As I mentioned earlier, most of Shed knows it's bad, but for one reason or another they refuse to leave, and even if they did try leaving, other members would try to drag them back. Over time, escalation becomes part of life. More extreme language, more visible harm. It's the only thing that breaks the normalcy and makes you stand out. The line is never crossed in Shed. It simply moves further until behaviors that would normally signal crisis in a 911 call are treated as routine, achievements, aesthetically pleasing. Suffering stops feeling urgent because it's everywhere. Just as connections once formed from concern and trying to get better, they now form from a decline in self-care. Your friendships are built upon mutual self-destruction, and everyone treats this as normal. So normal that memes about the very condition they're allegedly trying to prevent pop up constantly and get thousands of likes. At this point, that user has been desensitized. Things an ordinary person would consider horrific or extremely concerning are hardly given a second thought, besides a like, retweet, and maybe a comment. Part of this desensitization process is subjective. Shed's competitive aspect may motivate someone to start uploading their own content. Maybe they felt invisible again, felt the need to earn their attention, or were simply motivated by the post they saw and wanted to try it themselves. Hence, cutspo and thinspo. Whatever it is, they escalate because that's what Shed's environment rewards. Not support, not healing, but getting worse. The influx of likes and replies hits like a truck, like any other type of mass social media engagement. It's another source of dopamine. From here, recovery is even harder. Not only are you breaking one addiction, you're breaking two. Adding insult to injury, if you did break those addictions, you'd be abandoning most of the following you just garnered. Because if you start posting about recovery and stop posting photos, you're gonna lose a big chunk of them. The harsh reality of Shed Twitter is a lot of users don't want you or themselves to get better. Mental illness isn't something you can fix overnight, but it's still a thing you can be very aware of. Sadly, it's easier to stay miserable than go out of your way to put in the work of changing yourself. It's something tons of people struggle with. With that and everything else I've said so far in mind, I'd like to present my conclusion of sorts. Shed's true purpose is to keep everyone in a perpetual state of limbo, where they never improve so they don't feel so alone in their suffering, marketing themselves as a support group so they don't feel bad about it, and a method to draw in new members. That's why they're so comfortable in saying how much they hate Shed, openly admitting it's bad for them, toxic, whatever. You get it. It's a facade, a fake web of support meant to convince themselves that their bad habits are okay. Being criticized in any fashion is insensitive, and lastly, to keep a positive appearance up to retain users and draw new people in. This is why being outwardly toxic is okay, but certain things that you can really pin against the community are generally frowned upon, though still happen in abundance. That is my final verdict on Shed Twitter, mostly. You may have noticed there's still quite a bit of video left. That's because there's a pretty big group of people in Shed who are so much worse than that. Like I mentioned in the beginning, Shed is a disorganized collection of subcultures. The people you meet here range from the nicest soul in the world genuinely striving to be better, or the most disgusting individual you will ever meet. It's an environment adaptable to fit whatever motive you have in mind, and there's plenty of corners for whatever you're looking for. This is partially what gives the illusion of normalcy, when in reality, the even darker side of Shed is everywhere. Across Twitter are groups you can join that focus on topics, and most Shed-centered ones are absolutely littered with these aesthetically edited photos, or memes literally overlaid on top of them. Comments, of course, are full of compliments rather than concern. Going to this group specifically with almost 37,000 members, the first 8 photos in a row were of self-harm with thousands of likes. This isn't unique to this group specifically. In fact, most of them even aestheticize their names. The thin-veiled excuse of a support group is simply to not get taken down as easily, and the posts themselves claim it's makeup to dodge automated moderation. Let's take a look at this other group with 39,000 members. Out of these 5 rules, how many do you think are followed? 0. And the admin does literally nothing. She made a thread on how to find help and called it a day. Whether she's blissfully unaware or actively ignoring the problem is irrelevant because the problem exists nonetheless, and that problem is surface level. It's obvious. If you dig a little deeper though, you'll find some truly abhorrent shit. Namely, a severely uncomfortable fact. Shed can be used to groom minors into producing shock and fetish material. Conditioning members to be okay with this happens in plain sight inside of these circles. Bad actors don't even need to try, because the general culture of Shed does the work for them. Validation and intimacy are one hell of a drug when you're lonely, and in Shed, putting yourself on display equates to attention. Like any other drug, they'll do anything to get it, even if it means letting someone commit literal crimes in their DMs. Amidst the space, you can find adult men advertising themselves as weight loss coaches, teaching these young Shed users how to become even thinner. It's a control thing for them. They'll tell the user what to eat, how much, and when, and to send photos of everything. If they fail to follow instructions, they're punished, typically with insults, but sometimes demands for nudes or videos. Reminder, a large portion of these coaches are adults, and the average age of a Shed user is 14. This is a surprisingly well-known issue within Shed. Yet users still frequently request for weight loss coaches to contact them. Some even want to be abused. In typical Shed fashion, this isn't a concern. In my research for this video, do you want to take a guess how many posts out of hundreds I found spreading awareness on this? 1. A single post pointing out an account with over 1,200 followers was being creepy towards minors in a community almost fully comprised of them. Whether it's the act itself or the mental spiral someone is going through, there is an undeniably huge audience of people who enjoy watching this stuff. I mean, just look at the likes on this tweet. More worrying, there's people who know they can exploit Shed Twitter users. This dynamic is obviously dangerous enough as is, but it's even worse when it's so easy to seem sympathetic for someone, when in reality they're only there to watch you fall. Any guilt or doubt gets snuffed out through the echo chamber reminding everyone that none of their actions have any consequences. The worst end of Shed really like these photos, so much that they feel the need to leave their weird cutesy compliments, and maybe saying the quiet part out loud. Not only does the anonymity eliminate the possibility of feeling shame, it's downright socially acceptable to act this way. No one cares anymore. Something relatively popular in these groups is to promote an official Discord server, of course allegedly centered around getting help, yet they almost always contradict that by openly stating that they're toxic, which is code word for they're okay with talking about and loosely encouraging their habits. It's not a support server, it's yet another echo chamber, redirected off-platform to make it more private and depraved. That's not the only type of server though. There are Shed Discord servers that can only be described as archives. They're full of people who have absolutely zero care for anything related to support, instead hoarding as many pictures and videos as they can to create a fetish material catalog. Finding these servers is not easy. They're private, and to get in you'd have to know someone inside, but they do exist, they've been documented before, and they are fucking disgusting. If you've posted photos under the Shed Twitter hashtag, there is a solid chance your images have been downloaded and posted in one of these servers. I already sort of came to a verdict, but now I would like to come to a conclusion. Shed Twitter is a gateway, figuratively into a bleaker, melancholic mindset, and literally into even darker corners of the internet. Just so we're on the same page, this community is full of open aestheticism, fetishization, and comprised mostly of insecure minors looking for attention. It has a massive reconditioning, dare I say grooming problem, that turns the users into thinking the way they're acting is okay, and all of this swept under the rug under the guise of support. I call it a gateway because Shed is one of many entrances into a larger pipeline. Allow me to introduce one final argument for why I think this is the case. Desensitization means a person's mental boundaries for certain things weaken. Rejection, disgust, morality. Let's just be honest here. If people are okay with fetishizing Shed culture, they're probably open to other things too. The exact same way they join Shed may happen with other taboo or downright illegal communities, going from passive observer to active member, repeating the cycle once again. Shed doesn't make people suddenly complicit in everything. It's gradual exposure by the mountain of crazy shit in this video thus far, hence a pipeline. But where does that pipeline lead? It leads to my final argument of the video. Let me introduce you to para-Twitter, or paraphilia Twitter. It focuses on the attraction to unordinary things, which in this case means exactly what you think it does. Para-Twitter tries to reframe abuse and illegal paraphilias as stigmatized identities and beliefs rather than potentially harmful, under the guise of being pro-fiction, even though they openly fetishize these in ways that aren't fiction at all. Other times, it's not just pro-fiction, it's being anti-contact, meaning you have these urges but would totally never act on them since you're just so mentally stable. Any criticism against para-Twitter is deflected with the fiction argument, or once again calling you ableist, since para-Twitter members claim it's a trauma response. Does this sound familiar at all? Shed does the exact same thing, verbatim with the same excuses. Lo and behold, a lot of para members are also part of Shed, and said paraphilias do indeed revolve around Shed's illnesses. That's a whole different can of worms though, one that's getting its own respective video soon enough. To summarize everything, Shed as a community is meant to lock its users in a perpetual state of suffering, so other members don't feel alone. There's nothing recovery-oriented about it. Simply being here will make users worse in most cases, desensitizing them to their own problems. The longer they exist here, the less likely they are to ever break their habits. In the worst cases, it's an entrance into a horrific pipeline, making their old habits worse while also introducing all new ones. Meanwhile, it's groomer central. Bad actors come here to find potential victims, and barely need to mask themselves, since despicable behavior is all but tolerated. Yet, you can hardly bring up any of this without getting dismissed, since Shed Twitter has been conditioned to not care anymore. Good luck making your point. They'll have an excuse to cut you off before you can ever make it. Which is why I've made this video. I've seen this shit go on for way too long to not at least say something. We've finally made it to the end. To leave this video on a positive note, I'd like to discuss alternatives to being in Shed Twitter, and solutions in general. Most people just say go to therapy or get help and leave it at that. The absolute bare minimum if you ask me. That being said, those aren't bad ideas if you haven't done them yet. Breaking out of self-harm and unhealthy eating habits is really difficult. It's basically an addiction baked into a person's brain, typically because it causes strong emotional release. Medication is a great first step. Beyond that, the only way you can truly kick the habit and move on to a new life is by fighting your urges, and replacing those emotional releases with something else. The last thing you should do is join a group that both normalizes these habits and rewards them even more. My strongest recommendation is to pack up and leave Shed. Emphasis on pack up. Leaving the community should not be done by cutting off everybody and leaving empty-handed. At least, not always. Quietly dipping out, but retaining a few trusted connections who take recovery seriously is your best option. Muting as many keywords as you can to reduce chances of Shed sucking you back in is a great follow-up to this. Scorched Earth would be deleting Twitter completely, and honestly, Shed aside, that's a great idea to begin with. Anyone who glamorizes their conditions is a red flag and should not be spoken to after this. Block them and keep your circle healthy, and far away from Shed to avoid getting dragged back into the mindset. As for Shed itself, I'm gonna be real, it's gotta get nuked. The argument could be made this shouldn't happen, since what if that's the only thing holding someone together? And to that I say, masterful use of the appeal to emotion fallacy. If everything I said in this video can be justified in your head with the possibility that a Twitter group is the literal only thing tethering someone to this earth, then I doubt there's anything I can say to convince you otherwise. I've already made my arguments for why keeping hundreds of thousands in mental illness limbo for the sake of maybe helping a handful of people is not good. These groups also violate Twitter's terms of service, so there's that, I guess. Before closing this video out, I'd like to address the diehard Shed Twitter users who, if this video gets more than 5 views, are probably hate watching this. To the more normal side, I hope you reconsider your loyalty to the community and get out. It's bad for you and you know it. To the overly dedicated defenders of Shed, to you I say, go ahead. Do what you're famous for. Make some call-out thread on me. Spam my DMs with crazy shit. Mass report my socials. I'm in my 20s. I have like 5 years left to live. I do not care. Also, if you try discrediting this whole video with me trying to get views, if that were the case, don't you think I'd make something, I don't know, trending, safer, less repulsive to research? I'm doing it because I've watched how it hurts people for years at this point. If your takeaway from this entire video was, I want attention, then you're either trying to change the subject or a fucking moron. Case closed, that's it. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.